Um, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paula Mays. I'm the Sector Improvement Manager at OSCR, and I'm going to be your host today. I'm joined by some of my expert colleagues in the office. We have Martin Tyson, who's the head of our Regulation and Improvement, and Neil Edwards, who is one of our managers of our medium risk casework team. So they'll be talking us through the presentation, but I'm also joined by some of my very able colleagues, Steve Kent and Christopher Kennedy, who'll be answering any questions that you have in the chat box. So as is normal with these events now, please remain on mute while we're presenting. But if you do have any questions that you'd like us to pick up either at the end or throughout the chat, please pop it into the chat box and we'll come back to you as quickly as we're able to do that. So if you bear with me just 1 second, I'll share my screen and I'll let Martin start presenting. So Martin, over to you.
Great, thanks, Paula. Hi, so my name is Martin Tyson. As Paula said, I'm OSCR's Head of Regulation and Improvement, and really pleased to be speaking to you today. What I'm going to do is take you through a little bit of, I think, some of the things to talk about and with your fellow trustees and to think about and to get people to think about before they come to us. When you're at that stage of thinking about applying for charitable status. Talk a little bit about that, what's involved with charitable status, and then give you an overview of how we do what we do with applications for charitable status. That is, applications for organisations that want to be registered as a charity. And that will hopefully take you in very, very smoothly to what Neil has to say, where he's talking in more detail about how we do some of that consideration, what some of the wrinkles are, and how you can help yourself if you are applying for charitable status. So if we move on to the next slide, Paula, please. Yeah, what does it mean to be a charity in Scotland? Well, I mean, there's a simple answer to that. You can only be a charity if you are entered on the Scottish Charity Register. So if you are on the register, you will have a unique charity number. You'll need to display that charity number. You'll need to let people know that you're a charity in a number of contexts. To get onto the register, you can only get onto the register if we decide that you meet the charity test. So that's the legalities of it. And in a sense, that's very simple. The more interesting answer is, what does it mean to be a charity in Scotland? Well, you need to have a set of charity trustees. Those are the people who make decisions on behalf of, and crucially in the interest of the charity. They work together. They have collective responsibility for the management and control of the charity. And I suppose that the overall point I want to make here is, it isn't just about getting your charitable status. That's the beginning. By applying for charitable status and by getting onto the register, what you're doing is taking on a set of opportunities. So that can be the opportunity to get your rates or tax reliefs, also to apply for streams of funding that are only available for charities. But you're also taking on a set of obligations, a set of legal duties about how you describe yourself, how you present yourself in certain circumstances, a duty of reporting to us every year, preparing your accounts in particular ways. But the big one is, as charity trustees, you're taking on the obligation of behaving in particular ways and making sure that you fulfill those key charity trustee duties. That crucial one being acting in the interest of the charity. And that's a sort of long time obligation. That's throughout the life of the charity. And it's worth thinking about what that means, quite deeply before you apply. If we can move on to the next slide, please. I mean, I'm going to do the obvious thing here. read our guidance. We've got a very succinct bit of guidance called Becoming a Charity. And that sets out some of what I'm talking about here, and I suppose sets out some of the questions that you should be asking yourselves. And that's not things we're asking to be awkward. It's things we're asking because we know that these are things that sets of charity trustees can come to grief on if they haven't thought about them beforehand. I think the big one there, it probably seems like a bit of a killjoy question. Consider if being a charity is necessary. Think about what you are setting out to do. Why is it you are thinking of becoming a charity? Why is it you think you're going to take on that set of obligations? Is that because someone said, oh yeah, you need to be a charity to do that? Well, if they've said that, why? What is it that you will get out of that you couldn't otherwise? Again, are there opportunities that you wouldn't get for funding or for fundraising, or are there, is it that an organisation that you need to be affiliated with requires you to be a charity? Also, all those things can be valid reasons, but we have a sense that there are a number of applications that we'll get every year where it is hard to see the benefit that the charity and the trustees will get out of status, looking at what they do, look at the scale of what they do, or the nature of what they do. If you've managed to answer that kind of existential question, then there's a few things to think about before you even start filling in our application form. So charity is a label that we will kind of stick on your organization if it passes the charity test. But you've got to think about what kind of organization it's going to be. What's its legal form going to be? Is it going to be unincorporated, incorporated? Is it going to be a company, a trust? Is it going to be a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation, which most of the bodies that apply to be registered at the moment, that's the form that they choose. Where you go with that depends on what you want to do. Different types of, different activities, different sizes of charity, different scales of activity will suit different legal forms. Are you going to have a membership, or are you just going to have trustees? Is all that you're doing going to be giving out grants, or are you going to be taking on activities of your own? Are you going to employ people? Will you have land or buildings? So think about all those things. But again, coming back to the point I was making before, think about who's going to run the charity. Will you have enough trustees? Do you have people who have the commitment to take it forward and know what's involved? Again, a place where people come to grief is, okay, there's a couple of people who are really interested in getting this thing set up and getting the show on the road. And then they decide, okay, we need to bring a couple more people on board, and they just sort of get a few people on and don't really tell them what's involved, and they put their names to it. And then we get 2 or 3 years down the line, things get a bit crunchy, and suddenly you have a set of trustees where half the people have taken this on without necessarily knowing exactly what they've got themselves into. Think about it at the beginning, make sure everyone knows what they're taking on. How are you going to fund it? Do you have a sort of model for how the organisation is going to support itself, where it's going to get donations from, if it's going to apply for funding? How's that going to work? And I suppose underlining all this, and for a lot of people, the way forward with this will be go to one of the third sector interfaces that are in each local authority area for support with your application. The evidence for us is that where people have gone to one of those third sector interfaces, and I know there's a bunch of people from those on the call today, or another umbrella body. There's lots of specialist umbrella bodies and support bodies for specific types of charity. Where they've done that, they will tend to get on better with their application. We'll be able to process it quicker. They'll give us better and more useful answers. And also probably in the longer term, they'll be better because the TSI or the support body will have encouraged them to have those conversations, ask themselves those questions, and have that good think about it beforehand. That's really useful. Next slide, please. So turning on to the stuff that we do, once once you've filled in your form, which is online nowadays, once you've done that, press the submit button. What's our job? So one of our functions under the law is to determine if bodies are charities, to test them against that charity test, and Neil will take you into the detail of that later on, and to make a decision on that. The crucial, nowadays, the crucial, or one of the crucial bits of that is an initial risk assessment, which we do as soon as the application comes in, as soon as it comes down off the system into well, not the office these days, but into our laptops or wherever. And we look there at the nature of what the application looks like. Is it something that we've seen before? Is it a very familiar type of organization? Are there particular gaps in the information that's been given us? Are there any novel or controversial aspects to what's come in that are likely to cause us some trouble thinking about the charity test? And once we do that initial risk assessment, then the case gets allocated to one of our casework teams. We have 3. We have what's called low risk, high volume. And in a way that's self-explanatory. That's where the cases are assessed as low risk. We have a medium risk team, and that's where Neil comes in. And we have a high risk team. What that means in terms of processing for the low risk team, a lot of those cases will just be put on the register straight away if we've got nothing else to ask the applicants. There'll be some where we need just one document, we need a signature on something, there's just a very minor administrative thing to do. They'll go into the low risk box. Where we have more substantive questions, they'll go to Neil's team in medium risk. And where we have something that is a lot more substantive to ask, that will go to high risk. We can move on to the next slide, Paul, please. So I am not sure if all of the writing is absolutely visible, depending on the size of your screen, but this is our sort of flow chart. So we have an application. If you're going from the top there, that first red box, we have the application form. Thank you, Paul. Application form being submitted online. We get a new application identified. We identify whether it's complete. And sometimes there we'll have there'll be a document missing or a signature missing or something like that, and we'll go back. And then underneath that blue diamond, we go to risk assessment. And if it comes out as low risk, then we go straight through to either getting a little bit of information or simply to putting the application onto the register. If it comes out as medium or high risk, then we go to a process of assessment and probably a greater or a lesser degree of emailing to and fro to get the information we need, to ask the questions that we need, sometimes to have a discussion or an explanation where there are things that aren't becoming clear. And at that stage, either the application we will make a decision either to register the charity or to refuse to register it. You can just move on to the next slide, please, Paula. So what does all that mean? How does all that pan out? Well, I think one of the really significant things here is what this pie chart looks like. So the majority of applications that we receive in a given year will either come out as something we can register straight away. So that's that kind of puce color there, the 37%. That's something over a third of the applications will be ready to register straight away, and we will do that very quickly once we've risk assessed it. So that will be a matter of 3-4 weeks. The second highest chunk is low risk, where we maybe have 1 or 2 fairly administrative questions to ask, or very limited things to make sure of in an application, and that's around another third of those. That's sort of yellowy chunk at the bottom. And I suppose almost the where you want to be is in that yellow bit or in the piece bit if you're applying for charitable status, because what that will help you to do is get onto the register very quickly. You will have told us all or most of what you need to do. We will be finding what you're putting forward to be pretty unproblematic in terms of the charity test. And that will speed up your application. I suppose one of the things that we're wanting to help with today is to help applications where they should be unproblematic to be unproblematic and to flow through our system and get a decision, get on the register and get cracking with the public benefit that they're intending to provide as quickly as they can. So with that, I will pass over to Neil and he can take you through the actual, the detail of this.
Thank you, Martin. As Martin said, I am the medium risk casework manager in OSCR, and Martin's given you a bit of a background in terms of how we look at and risk assess applications when we receive them. I'll give you a little bit of background in terms of what's actually in the application form and possibly some common mistakes and maybe hints and tips that would maybe mean your application was ready to register or low risk rather than medium risk, because we quite often see a number of applications that are put into medium risk that have maybe got 2 or 3, or well, maybe 3 or 4 sort of minor things that have pushed them into medium risk just because we're missing some information that maybe could have been put in the application form or supporting documents. So, I mean, first thing, once you've actually gone into the portal, you'll get your username and password. You fill in the questions in the application form. When you're doing that, you need to attach your constitution/governing document. At the same time, put in any completed charity trustee declaration forms, and a SKIO must have a minimum of 3. Also at that point, you put any supporting documentation to go alongside your application form. So that could be draft or current accounts, a business plan, a draft lease, any information about your activities that you found was more useful to put in a supplement document rather than trying to put it in the box in the form, which sometimes isn't the easiest to use. So once we have received the application, a file is created on our system, and we will still accept subsequent documents for the application via our email address or postal address after the application being submitted, such as extra trustee declaration forms or another document that wasn't ready at the time for application. Please note, if you are putting any documents by post, please include the charity name so we can marry it up. Next slide, please. I've called this common mistakes, but this could easily just be missing information that we see in applications, which may make our life and ultimately the applicant's life a little bit easier. So an incomplete constitutional or governing document, so the constitution that has been submitted by the applicant, is not based on a model constitution and or does not contain all the information or clauses that are required to be entered as a charity. At the same time, the applicant has possibly chosen the wrong legal form on the drop-down, and the constitution submitted does not marry up for that legal form. So, for example, they've chosen the legal form of SKIO, but the constitutional document that's submitted is for a company. So that's one instance that we would have to go back to the applicant and ask, so do you want to be a SKIO or do you want to be a company? So just an example of sort of questions we would go back. I would refer everyone to have a read of our legal characteristics guidance and also becoming a charity guidance. Trustee declaration forms. So a SKIO must have at least 3 charity trustees, and we would recommend from a good governance point of view that all charities have at least 3 trustees. So when you're applying under that legal form especially, you'd have to put in the 3 trustee declaration forms. Please use the actual forms on our website. I have seen all sorts, from passports to driving licenses to name and addresses. The link can be shared by the guys in the chat. So the constitutional document itself selects lots of charitable purposes, and I would say that more purposes does not mean things are better. It does not mean that you are more likely to get charitable status. you only need to further one charitable status and charitable purpose in order to pass the charity test. So a common thing would be including charitable purposes that your proposed activities will not further. Your charitable purpose should outline what you're trying to achieve and does not require to be a full list of the proposed daily or weekly activities. I would refer you to meeting the charity test guidance, which outlines the charitable purposes which are in Section 7 of the 2005 Act and gives some examples of activities which could further each of the charitable purposes. I would say when drafting your charitable purposes, less is more. And please remember that those purposes will show if you are awarded charitable status on the Scottish Charity Register under your charity details. So they have to be quite, I would say it's probably better, they're quite easy to read and that the members of the public understand them, because obviously this will be looked at by funders as well. Next slide, please. In terms of Section 7 of the application form, asks questions about activities. So these are the actual questions that are outlined in the form. So what activity is your project going to run? How will these activities help achieve the organisation's charitable purpose? Who will benefit from these activities? Will the organisation be involved in any training and education? In this section, I would say, do not just repeat the charitable purposes that are outlined in your constitution. You need to go into more detail in terms of how you will actually achieve this. At this section, you need to tell us what the activities are in practice. So who, what, where, and sorry, who, what, why, and where. Your proposed activities can be put in the form, but if it's easier, we do see a number of business plans or planning documents, which maybe outline in more detail, might include pictures or projects, which might be an easier way to sort of describe what you intend on carrying out. In this section of the form, it's also a good time to tell us who will benefit from your activities and how will you advertise these proposed activities, your use of any social media such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or a website. And that can be included in the form in a slightly earlier section, and we can have a look at that as a good way to advertise what activities you will be doing. The next set of slides will only be relevant if you select yes to whether or not you undertake this type of activity in the form. So I'll move on to them. Can I get the next slide, please? So if you say yes to providing education or training, these are the questions that are in the application form. I will not go through every question because I don't want to go through every single question in the slide, but I would say the way in which education is provided doesn't have to be formal, but it must have a structure that's capable of educating the audience. Simply by providing information is not necessarily advancing education. The intention of the activity must be to educate. A common sort of thing we might go back to applicants that they may well put they are doing training classes or some sort of educational activity, but it can be unclear from us what role the trustees will have in delivering this education and what relevant experience qualifications they have in this field. So we may ask for some further information about that. Who's delivering the education? If it is the trustees, are they qualified? Do they have experience to deliver this type of activity? Can I get the next slide, please? So again, if you answer that application form asks if you're going to carry out any trading activities. So if you select yes, these are the further subsequent questions that will be on the form. So it asks whether it's primary purpose trading, non-primary purpose trading, and whether the charity itself intends to carry out the trading, or will it be through one or more subsidiaries. So when deciding this, the charity trustees need to consider whether they'd be undertaking trading activity and how this would fit in with your charitable purpose. If you have decided on carrying out trading to raise funds, what would happen if this does not make a profit? Will there be any charitable assets at risk? And should this trading be carried out through a separate trading company to try to mitigate some of this risk? We have guidance on our website, charities and trading guidance. There's also the similar name guidance on HMRC's website, which may be useful and could be maybe put in the chat if the guys can do that for me. Thank you. Can I get the next slide, please? So another sort of common theme that we would maybe go back to applicants about would be the overseas activities. I won't go through all the questions, but these are the exact questions. So Some of these might seem a bit obvious, but the reason they're put in and we question it is because we have had to go back to people. So even such things as what overseas countries will you be working in? So they may be stated in the purposes in the constitutional document, but there's nothing sort of further in the proposed activities that mention that country or a particular area of the country. So what I would say is try to be specific. What areas will you operate in? How would this work in practice? This obviously will vary from country to country and what part of the world it is. Also, things to think about are the trustees intending on moving any money or goods, equipments to another country? What research have the proposed trustees carried out to see if this is feasible? We would also expect the applicant to have done some research regarding this and what risks there may be in any of these proposed activities to themselves or others. There's been 2 recent news items about donations and fundraising for Ukraine, and signpost people towards the charities involved in the Disasters and Emergency Committee. Can I look at the next slide, please? We still get a number of charities which will be partially or solely involved in grant giving to other organisations or individuals. So if you select yes to this type of activity, these are the questions that will automatically drop down. I won't go through them all, but the most likely ones we have to go back on is, do you have a copy of a grant giving application that you can provide to OSCR? So the sample form that you would ask people to fill in if they were looking for a grant from your organisation. Do you have any grant giving criteria? There's certain individuals or organisations you would give grants to and things you wouldn't. Other things possibly to consider are any of the recipients based out with the UK? And how would the charity transfer any grants to organisations based in other countries? In terms of our risk assessment, it can be useful to know what amount will these grants be and how many grants will the organisation make per year. We'll then know if any subsequent information would be regarding about in terms of monitoring how these grants are used. So the level of grants itself would determine the level of monitoring required by the trustees further down the line. What evidence would the charity trustees ask for how grants are spent? Who is receiving grants? This again could affect things. Would it just be for other charities or organisations, or would it include individuals? I would refer you to the grant giving guidance that is available on our website. Can I get the next slide, please, Paula? So this is a section 8 about private benefit. This could form a presentation of its own, so I apologise a little bit for how brief this will be in terms of the detail I go into. These are the exact questions that are asked in that section. So one of the things when we decide if an organisation provides public benefit, we must also look whether anyone benefits from the organisation as a private individual other than as a member of the public. If it appears that the organisation has been set up wholly or mostly for the private benefit of an individual or group of people, it is unlikely that it will pass the charity test. So a common example that we would perhaps go back to an applicant about would be a scenario where an organisation, a brand new organisation which has never been run previously, requires a CEO or manager. That individual will be a proposed charity trustee and will get paid a significant salary, but no further information has been provided. So some of the follow-up questions we might ask, some of the trustees perhaps themselves need to think about even before applying for charitable statuses. Does that individual have the experience, skills and qualifications to do the job? How is that salary level been decided? Is it a job description? Has this been compared to other like similar organisations or charities? Do you have enough unconnected trustees to make the decision? What I mean by that is the trustee themselves would not be involved in the decision in terms of them getting paid or the level of their salary. So do you have enough unconnected trustees to make a quorum to make that decision? And most importantly, does the Constitution allow a trustee to be employed by the charity? I would refer to the private benefit section in our meeting the charity test guidance. There's also a separate page on our website which covers trustee remuneration and the restrictions that are in that within the 2005 Act. Can I get the next slide, please, Paula? So we also have a section on the restrictions on access to benefit. So these are the exact questions from the application form. We have to go back to applicants from time to time regarding this. but it's more usually for clarification on the restrictions rather than anything else. So in terms of these questions, help us to assess whether or not any restrictions to access to benefits your organisation intends to provide are undue. So most organisations put limits on who can benefit from their activities, and most of the time this would not stop an organisation providing public benefit. We decide whether or not an organisation does provide public benefit. We have to look at whether it restricts access to the benefit it provides, and if it does, whether or not the restriction is undue. We have to look at the organisation's purposes and decide whether or not any restrictions are unreasonable, unjustifiable, or unlawful. If we require any more information about any restrictions, we will contact the applicant. And I would say, from all the sections that I've gone through, when you are applying for charitable status, it's not just you get one shot and we never go back to you for more information. We will always go back to you for clarification on information you've put, or if something's not clear to us, or something's novel and we've never seen it before, we will always go back to you for more information. So it's not ever a case of one chance and one strike and it's a yes or no. Can I get the next slide, please, Paula? So these are your guidance and support that's available from ourselves and other organisations. So on our website, we've got thinking about becoming a charity. That's 5 steps to think about. So that would be before you're even submitting your application form. On the OSCR website, we've also got a 15-page guide called Being a Charity in Scotland. So when deciding on what your organisation will do and drafting your charitable purposes, the meeting the charity test guidance is the biggest and most comprehensive guidance we've got. If you are thinking of the legal form becoming a SCIO, there's a separate, distinct SCIO guidance, which will be useful for charity trustees throughout the lifetime of a SCIO. We have also got the SCVO website, where you'll find model constitutions suitable for the most popular legal forms of charity. And you also have the TSI Scotland network, and I think we've already had a link shared in the chat about that. So thank you very much. I will pass you back to Paula now.
Thanks, Neil. We've had a few advanced questions, so I think we'll cover off some of those to begin with. And the first one I'm going to give to Martin so that Neil can have just a moment to breathe. Neil talked a little bit about remuneration in his presentation, Martin. This is about charity trustees being paid. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what the rules are, please?
Yeah, so I mean, there are 2 sort of sides to this, and they're linked, but they're slightly separate, and we need to think about them slightly separate. Where charity law starts from is, I think, a sort of default position that charity trustees will be unpaid. They won't be remunerated for acting as trustees or for services provided to the charity. So the only way that can happen is if certain conditions are met. Now, those conditions are set out in our trustee guidance. That they're quite detailed, so I'd refer you to those. But the big ones are that the other charity trustees, the ones who aren't going to be remunerated, have thought quite carefully about why this particular bit of remuneration, that a trustee being paid in this way, is in the interest of the charity, that the amount that they're being paid, the way they're being paid, is in the interest of the charity. There needs to be a contract that sets this all out, and less than half of the charity trustees at any one time need to be remunerated. There's a few other conditions around that, but I think you get the gist here. There needs to have been a very clear consideration of why, if for any charity, including charities that have been on the register for a long time, including charities that just come onto the register, as to why they are paying their trustees. They need to be able to justify it. But when Neil's team are looking at charity trustees being paid, they're looking at that primarily in terms of that private benefit consideration that's part of the charity test. And that is, how does any benefit to an individual or someone as a private individual, how does that compare with the public benefit that the charity will provide? And what we're what our concern would be there is if we have a sense that that private benefit is outweighing any benefit to the public from what the charity does. I suppose another way of putting it would be if we are seeing evidence that the organisation has been set up for the benefit of an individual or individuals. So that's what we're looking for there. It's a related consideration, but it's relevant as well. And a lot of the questions that Neil highlighted in that private benefit section will be around that, and it will be okay. You're applying for to have this organisation registered as a charity. You, as a charity trustee, or a number of the charity trustees, are looking to be paid. Why is that? What's your justification for that? What is it that those trustees can do for that particular amount of money that no one else can bring to the charity? How is it you justify employing them rather than anybody else? What is the level of benefit to the individual as opposed to the section of the public that the charity is supposed to benefit? So that's the consideration that we get into there. I don't know, Neil, is it fair to say that's probably the most common area of refusal of status still, private benefit?
Yes, I would say in terms of what we may also do, if it's the applicant themselves, perhaps the founder is the person who's saying, I'm going to do this job and I'm going to get paid this salary, we may go back to all the proposed trustees if we're going to ask questions rather than just this one individual, because ultimately it will be the other trustees who agree and approve this rather than going back to that individual. So we will ask questions of them collectively because they're all collectively responsible. So it's not just one person justifying why they are the best person for the job. Ultimately, it would be for all the unconflicted trustees to make that decision. So we almost to a certain extent want to make sure we've got them a collective response saying, yes, this is the right person to do the job, not an applicant saying, yes, I am the best person to do the job. So sometimes we do that as well.
Yeah, there's just a question in the chat there. Someone's asked, therefore equality in employment law plays a part too. No, not sure it does. I think what we care about is, okay, you're going to pay yourself some money from the charity. Why? How do you justify that? Why is it that that's necessary, or just merely incidental to the provision of whatever benefit it is to the public that the charity is going to provide? So that it's not particularly about equality in employment law.
Thanks both. That's quite a complex area, isn't it? Sorry, Neil.
Just one thing. Another question we would go back is to ask where this amount has been, how's it been calculated, how's it been sort of benchmarked? So a mysterious £50,000 salary might come out. What have you benchmarked at? How have you decided that that's the number? So that if we are going back asking questions about that, we would also ask about how's the level of salary being calculated.
Yeah. And again, it's about almost sort of showing your work and what's the reasoning behind this level of private benefit. And that's what we take into in that comparison between the private benefit and the benefit that's intended to be provided to the public.
Super. Okay, Neil, the next question's for you. I want to know about, what's the rules for names of charities? Are there any special words that you can or can't use? For example, can you use the word foundation in your name?
Yes, you can use the word foundation. So we would ask information regarding that. So we would require the applicant to have either a pool of cash or source of income or a regular source of income in place upon the registration. So that'd be one of the questions we would go back to the applicant. There's also a number of other words which previously applicants would have to seek permission from Companies House. So that was association, benevolent, federation, Scotland in certain circumstances, society and trust. But Companies House relaxed their rules March 2020. And I put my hand up now. I've just sent them the chaser email today to see if those rules are still in place. We do see these words from time to time, but perhaps not as much as we used to, let's say 10 years ago. I think the language and names of charities have perhaps evolved a little bit, possibly from the introduction of the legal form of SCIO. These sort of words are potentially maybe a little bit older fashioned, but yes, these are the words, or some of them, that are covered under sensitive names and expressions. It's company legislation.
Great. Is there anything else that would make a name objectionable?
If it was did not reflect what the charity did, so it's misleading. So if you are involved in a particular type of activity or purpose and your name was completely at odds with that, or if the name of the proposed charity was either exactly the same or extremely similar to a registered charity, to a point of a member of the public would get them confused. So exactly the same is a no-no, and it'd have to be very, very similar. In those instances, again, we would point that out to an applicant. We might suggest something to differentiate you from the existing charity, something to reflect your geographical spread, name the town or city that you operate in.
Yeah. It can also be objectionable, a name that we have to turn down if it's offensive, but sadly those are very rare because those are fun.
Thanks, Martin. On to something a little bit more serious. Can you be a social enterprise with charitable purposes?
I suppose I'd I don't know if you wanted me to take this one, Paula. Yeah?
Yes, please.
I'd kind of turn it round. The job that we have to do, the decision that we have to make is whether the particular entity, whatever it is, the applicant, passes the charity test, and in a sense, whether or not it calls itself a social enterprise isn't absolutely part of that test. What we're looking at is, well, does it have charitable purposes? And that'll be the purposes that are stated in its constitution. Okay, if it does, great. What's it going to do? Will those activities provide public benefit in furtherance of its purposes? And we would look at all the things that Neil talked about. Now, where we're in the realm of social enterprises, that's a way of thinking about activity that's, I suppose, more widely for the benefit of the community and it involves particular types of activity. It's a way of thinking. It's a label. It's a certain methodology, but it can be a very variable one. The job we have, as I say, is to look at the entity very, very straight and very much along the lines that we look at everything else. Where are the wrinkles with things that with organizations that would describe themselves as social enterprises? Well, sometimes there aren't any wrinkles. Sometimes you can have something that you would say we're a social enterprise, and it's very firmly charitable. It has charitable purposes. It is very clearly providing public benefit in furtherance of those purposes. There's maybe some private benefit, but it's minor. It's incidental. There is trading going on. That's how the charity is providing its public benefit, or that's how it's paying for its public benefit. But the way that's being carried out is unproblematic, and there is no allowance for any surpluses in the charity to be used except for charitable purposes. A lot of social enterprises will completely fit that bill. Where you have if you like sort of more questions around the edges might be around the sort of more commercial end of social enterprise where there is a higher level of benefit to the people involved, or where we have issues around whether surpluses or the assets are allowed to be used for non-charitable purposes. But Neil will have a view of this. He will see a lot more of this. I think it's not the label that we will have a problem with. It's not the concept of social enterprise that we will have the problem with. It will be specific things about specific applications. Is that fair to say, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, obviously, social enterprise is quite a popular term, quite a popular banner to put on organisations which are charities or not charities, but I've seen a few definitions of what people think that means. I mean, if somebody's referring to themselves as a social enterprise or not, it probably isn't particularly relevant in our assessment. We will look at constitution, the charitable purposes, proposed activities, and the various elements of the charity test that I've outlined. We do get asked from time to time about, can a social enterprise be a charity? Well, it's not quite as simple as that. It depends what you're doing, and it's not really something that we would sort of look at in great detail in terms of how they are referred to themselves. It's whether they meet the charity test or not.
Great. Okay. I think quite a complex area, but I think you guys have covered that off nicely. The final question that we had that was given to us in advance was from an organisation who plan to be a fully youth-led organisation. And they're asking, Martin, please, if there's any specific guidance that's available around involving young people in the process of governance.
Okay, and the short and not particularly useful answer to that is no, there isn't. I'm just looking at there's a question from Jess in the chat that's relevant to this, and that's the idea of having a youth advisory board where young people would sit on an advisory board to help the main board. And we get a number of arrangements. We have obviously a number of organisations on the register that are set up and where the intention is to involve young people in the governance of the charities as well as being beneficiaries of the charity. I mean, I think that there's an element of horses for courses with this. I would say that the big thing about involving people as trustees, and this cuts across a number of areas. They need, if they're trustees, they are taking on all the duties of trustees. They need to be able to act in the interests of the charity and fulfill all of those charity duties, to act with care and diligence. And there's nothing in the law that if you like, allows some kind of exception to that. The general view is that trustees are collectively responsible. So anyone who is a trustee needs to be able to fulfill all of that role. They need to be able to make decisions and take part in decisions on the part of the charity. And I suppose for any given charity, that it's worth thinking about what those decisions will be. What is it? If you're dealing with very young people, if you're dealing with a 16, an 18, or even a 19-year-old, and you are asking them to make decisions on employing people, on getting into contracts, on procurement, on disciplinary matters, is that fair? Is it fair to be able to expect them to do that? If you do decide it's fair, have you given them the induction and the training that will enable them to take their full part in that? And if you look at that and think, well, no, that doesn't seem to work for us. That doesn't seem to work for us in terms of the scale of what's involved with our activities, the risks that are involved in our activities. We want there to be, if you like, a strategic or a policy input from young people, but we don't want them to have to take on those responsibilities and the full weight of that. Then there may be some value in thinking about other ways of getting that sort of guidance and input from young people as the people benefiting from and involved in the charity, whether it's some kind of advisory committee or panel or board. But I think it is very much about looking at the scale and the risks involved in what you want to do. There may be an element of looking at the life experience of the individual person you're looking to come onto the board, if it's just one individual. But it goes back to the point I was making at the beginning. People need to know what they're taking on, and they need to be equipped to take it on, and they need to be able to take a full part in that trustee role, to be able to challenge, to be able to take part in decisions. Is there any specific guidance? I think again, that if I was doing that, what I might do is talk to some peer organisations. That there are other organisations. Scottish Youth Parliament is one that comes to mind, where there is that different kind of involvement for young people in the running of the organisation, and it's worth looking at and trying to pick up on other people's experience there.
Okay. If there's nothing else, then I'd just like to take the opportunity to say thank you to both Martin and Neil, particularly for presenting today, and to my other colleagues for giving me a bit of assistance. And thanks to you for coming along and for asking some really great questions. If you don't mind and you have a couple of minutes, I would really appreciate it if you could fill out the evaluation form, which should ping through to your email address in the next 5 minutes or so. There's only 10 questions. It takes a couple of minutes, but it's really critical in helping us to think about what are the other kinds of events that you would like to come to, that you would like to hear. What information would you like to hear from OSCR later on in the year when we set up the next set? So, like I say, thank you very much for coming, and have a great rest of the day. Cheerio.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.